Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual breakfast sessions. Today, we have something strange and different for the virtual breakfast sessions. Instead of having our normal guests like we always do, basically what we've done is we turn the audience into the guest. And we're going to do a roundtable discussion on, Fred, why don't you ask the question and then we'll introduce the sponsors.
Yeah. So the question was, what we originally want to talk about was sort of the impact of robotics on where we're going as an industry. And so the question became one of the robotic companies like to say that there won't be any impact on the workforce count. And I call BS on that, obviously. And what they're selling is that it's going to change the types of jobs. And my point is similar to what we just talked about with Charles. 2008 turns into 2011, turns into 2024. And with that comes increasing wages. And at some point, an industry can't afford the wages anymore. And technology needs to come in and find its place. So my question is there a future of both technology, robotics, and what our jobs going to look like going forward?
And as a segue to that, let's thank our sponsor, ERA, the leader in capital conservancy. There are leaks in the revenue stream, and if vendor inconsistencies are one of those leaks, call ERA and Ed Flanagan. They will help you find that money that you thought has gone down the stream. And Eastern Business Solutions, the finest in product, service, and if you need business machines. So back to our topic. Charles, you were talking about the short memories of the clubs that you work with. Start on that, please.
So the conversation we were having earlier revolved around the way that clubs in general, but it's not just clubs, it's hospitality properties, have short memories. And the statement was in 2008, we all woke up one day and in September 2008, the market crashed. October 2008, the market crashes. 2009, we spend cutting expenses, beginning to figure out some new revenue streams. 2010, we're kind of back on our feet. But seemingly, January 2011 hits, we've forgotten everything that happened in 8, 9, and 10. And all of a sudden, we're spending money again. And the same exact thing happened during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, we obviously all shut down for a short amount of time. We reopen with minimal services at first. And equally importantly, we're able to cut out a lot of the bad business practice and blame it on the pandemic. And it was great. Some really stupid things we used to do. Now can't afford to do them anymore. Pandemic doesn't allow us to do them. And here we are in 2024, and that's all forgotten. And what do we now have? We have all these clubs in particular that have just taken on staggering amounts of debt because, the club down the street has built a new maintenance facility and they spent $2 million. We're going to spend $3 million. Everybody needs an outdoor patio. Well, we're going to put an outdoor patio that's twice as big and it's going to have the best furniture and it's blah, 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 go on and on. So now all of a sudden, some of the businesses I work with that were looking at projects, let's say in the $10 million range that were reasonable for them debt-wise, suddenly say, oh, no, let's rip down the building. Let's build a new clubhouse. It's $20 million. They don't even think about the implications. Forget about the economic implications. They don't even think about the discomfort it causes their members and their guests over the next 2 to 3 years because they try to phase this stuff in. So your clubhouse is going to be closed for somewhere along the line. Your golf course is going to be closed for a season. This stuff happens more and more every day. And I scratch my head if something were to happen a la the pandemic, a la 2008, how these folks are going to pay their bills.
Yeah, Bob.
And my specific question going into the discussion we had was about the Princeton Club. So it's not like we're talking about a small brand here. Princeton University, et cetera.
What happened to the Princeton Club?
So the Princeton Club, real simply, had a mortgage they could not afford to pay. They defaulted on their mortgage. The mortgage was bought by an outside company. Subsequently, they were not in a position to reopen the club, and this is an oversimplification. And you fast forward, and the deed got sold, and the building got sold, and the debt got sold. And so bottom line is the Princeton Club doesn't exist anymore. And that's a really oversimplification of a multi-year problem. But I would suggest that they got too deep into debt and couldn't get out. And they were the first ones. One thing you need to understand, though, Fred, and you mentioned it, keep in mind that when you talk about Princeton Club, Harvard Club, Yale Club, Cornell Club, for example, they are independent of their universities, with the exception of the Cornell Club. The Cornell Club is actually owned by the university in a totally unique scenario. But the others are independent and, in fact, want to be independent of the university.
But the perception is that the school owns the
Yes.
brand to those of us outside of it.
And for those of us that have been around a while, you'll remember the Williams Club. The Williams Club actually was an independent organization on 39th Street. They, in turn, turned around at one point and gave the building back to Williams College because they couldn't afford it in an attempt. And then what happened? The university changed upper management, I think it was the president, and they turned around and sold the building. The Williams Club went out of business.
We're not in the real estate business. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you do have some other clubs in the city that are tied into universities like Syracuse and stuff like that, but they're small. And then you have other universities, and this isn't a university necessarily conversation. You have some universities that have just decided to be alumni organizations, and they piggyback on the backs of other clubs. So that's another way to look at it. But don't kid yourself. All the rules and regulations that New York City keeps putting in on food and beverage and garbage and stuff like that apply to clubs too. And they take it on the chin. So here's everybody trying to figure out how to fix the garbage problem in New York.
Bob, you've been dealing with
business.
Bob, you've been dealing with businesses large and small for 30 years now.
Yeah.
What do you see in common with all these businesses? That Charles was talking about large companies, large businesses. What do you see in businesses, large, small, that people should worry about, people should keep their eye on?
Well, I think one of the biggest underlying problems for everything is a result of either no or a very poor business plan. And when I say a business plan, I'm not just talking about where we're at X amount of revenue right now, and in 5 years we'd like to be here, and so forth. It goes much deeper than that. It talks, a good business plan will talk about monitoring, regulating your expenses at the leakage that you guys are talking about, and we'll talk about strategic direction, who our market is, where we want to be, and so forth. I listened to you talking about the clubs. And those clubs actually, in the beginning, had a very good business plan, right? They had an available market, lots of alumni that were happy to be associated with the name, that wanted a place to go. It really filled a great niche. But I guess my question is, what happened there? Did they try to be something they couldn't be with their revenue? Did they try to offer services, a look, a feel that wasn't supported by actual revenue, and therefore went into a hole and eventually went out of business? That's what it sounds like to me. If regular business behaved like that, it would be. That's what puts businesses out of business, I suppose.
Well, in the club world, and it's a real simple thing. I think two things. One, they accepted mediocrity, and number two, competition. And then they all started to get into the secondary and tertiary competition business. And so, you open a gym. Do you open a gym that looks like Equinox? You do a gym in the back room, and then suddenly don't understand why members don't use it. And it was a lot of that in the early days. And then I think in the club case, there were a lot of clubs that specifically forgot the fact that they were multi-million-dollar businesses. And if you were in the food and beverage business and you were losing, $900,000 a year, they were okay with that. They just, in the old days, divided the $900,000 loss amongst the membership, and the membership wrote a check. And then one day the membership said, that's not, we're going to do it. So to your point, the business plan and the strategic plan didn't exist. And so that was the biggest problem. And now there's still a lot of them playing catch up. Now we find clubs in particular spending tremendous amounts of money to build resources that their members can use to make them competitive. You know, you can have a great food and beverage program. You look at the Union League Club of Philly. There is no better example of a club that's turned itself around. It's the number one city club in the country. And 15 years ago, they weren't like that. But they did some things way out of the box and spent a tremendous amount of money in debt. Or I should say, they have a tremendous amount of money in debt. But the Union Club of Philly owns a block in downtown Philly, which they always own. They also own a parking garage next door, which they didn't. They also own a restaurant on the Jersey Shore. That's only open to the membership. They own a restaurant in Northern Philly. They own 2 country clubs and a convention center, all for their membership.
Wow.
But again, that's a one-off.
Now, I have a question to ask. In most businesses, is it one of these catastrophic, stupid mistakes like, knocking down the clubhouse and rebuilding one instead of renovating? I mean, most businesses are small, independent businesses that don't have the capital to do that. So, A, is it that catastrophic mistake? Or B, is it that slow bleed? The slow bleed that you don't notice, that ends up catching up to you and destroying your business. Ed, can you talk about that, please?
Yeah,
Yes.
can you hear me, Larry?
Yes, I can, Ed.
Yeah, I think it is the slow bleed. It's them not recognizing that things are deteriorating, costs are increasing, and they're not looking at it. And it comes over and takes over their business. And they can't offset it by increased revenues.
Yeah,
I think it's both, though. And Bob mentioned it. If you're running a business, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about a club, a restaurant, a hotel, and you don't have a strategic plan and you don't think forward, you're crazy. And that's the bigger problem. You in the case of clubs in particular, you get these board members that come in, they have a 2-year term, a 3-year term. They're not the ones that are responsible 6 years down the road, 9 years down the road when they're gone. And I think
how do you check that? How do you check a board, a runaway board?
You build strategic plans, and then you agree when you go on the board, and this is, again, an oversimplification, that you abide by the strategic plan. And, you don't have situations where somebody comes in and says, okay, we're going to go do the golf course irrigation project, when realistically it doesn't need to be done for 5 years, okay, or something like that. Well-run businesses, and I'm going to take the word club out purposely, do these things, as Bob said, strategically. And they don't do it in other businesses, and that's why they fail.
So the scary thing is that these clubs, these university setups, everything that we've been describing, should be smart enough to do that. They should have the resources. They're educated. They've got multi-million-dollar investments in these properties. It's almost embarrassing that they do fail. The people that are really in trouble, though, are the majority of restaurants, the ones I go to. There's no strategic plan. There's no anything. They just some of them are paying their taxes with last night's receipts, and so when their target client base, their ideal target client base ages out or stops coming, they don't know how to get a younger crowd. They don't know how to do anything, and they don't typically plan for it until it happens, right? And then you're digging yourself out of a hole, and I think that's. From my perspective, and again, I'm just a civilian, from my perspective, there's a lot of smaller, poorly run businesses in the restaurant and food business that and you can see it, they go in and out of business all the time, the cost of entry, whatever. There's just a proliferation of bad business practices in the food business, evidenced by the pay that they pay people. They can't even afford to pay people the right kind of money, a lot of them. So
to your point, read this morning's restaurant review in the New York Times. Laveau d'Or, which was an old Upper East Side restaurant that had been closed for roughly 20 years, just reopened. Got a 2-star review in the Times this morning, and it was known as in the old days as kind of a power bistro, like neighborhood, very comfortable, and had a great reputation. And it got reopened by the guys that have Frenchette and Le Rock in Rock Center. It's an interesting review when you read it, because there is certain people that have coming to it thinking it's going to be the version of, or a more modern version, I should say, of what it was 20 years ago. There are others that know it because they know the restaurants Frenchette and Le Rock, and they think it's going to be the hottest thing in the world. And when you read the review, what you really see, to your point, is I'm not sure who their market is. Is the market the people that were there 20 years ago, or is it the people that know them, the restaurateurs and themselves? And the end of the review basically says it'll be interesting to see what happens, and I'm oversimplifying, it'll be interesting to see what happens when everything calms down, because right now it's like the hardest reservation to get in New York. But the bottom line is the food is good on the traditional side, and they criticize some of the food on the kind of more modern side. So you just kind of start with the basic business plan, like Bob said at the beginning. Who's your market? Is your market as an independent restaurant the Upper East Side and want to build a regular clientele and build upon those people that remember it from 20 years ago? I got news for you. There's not a lot of those people left. They've moved out of New York. They've aged out.
Or they're dead.
Yeah, and they made this restaurant look, dead, absolutely. They made this restaurant look a lot like it did 20 years ago. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I don't think it was perhaps as well thought out, to Bob's point, as it could be. So it doesn't matter. We're talking about clubs or restaurants. It's a really interesting review.
So the discussion is it build it and they will come, or is it you have to listen to what your customers want? What's the blend? And Joyce, who I know is on the call, covers that for us all the time. What's your read, Joyce?
Unmute.
Hi, could you say that again?
So the question is, relative to this review in the Times today, is this business about build it and they will come and they'll eat whatever it is you serve them? Or is it, do you listen to what people want and create something that serves that?
I think there's mass confusion right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on between the older generation and what they're used to eating, the younger generation and their interest in trying new cuisines and mixed up cuisines. Like when we had Nouvelle Cuisine years ago, people didn't know what to make of it. The recipes that are used, when they were French classic based, when you went for coq au vin at one restaurant, it was coq au vin at another restaurant. Right now, there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of ingredients that are coming in from all over the world. We have our fresh produce gentleman who's on all the time talking about the exotic fruits and vegetables that he's able to bring in. I also think there's been some write-ups recently about the medications for weight loss and how now that is affecting how restaurants are delivering their dishes and what's on the dishes. It happens to be changing the landscape of taste buds and what people will eat. And the portion amount, you used to go for family style meals. I don't know that that's still, a big trend anymore. But if you look at what's really going on in the mainstream.
I had to get somebody a reservation at Carmine's last week. I can assure you it's still going on. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Sorry.
But the thing is, and that is still going on because this is a slow changing movement regarding, weight loss and how it's affecting restaurateurs. We also have a change in where and what the Dietetics Association is supporting and the health movement and the plant-based movement. So there's so much going on that's interesting, that offers our chefs and our food professionals the opportunities to be creative and inventive. I just am concerned. I think on one of our recent virtual breakfast sessions, we talked about the cost of trucking and how that's affected the costs, that's being passed on for the ingredients that are being used. Are we going back to more of a, well, what's local, what's seasonal? The changes are happening now. They're very fast. I think Charles Feldman, at the college, what are you talking about with the students? I mean, you've got, a mixture of students, but a lot of young people. What are you hearing from them? Because
on top of that, Charles, talk about nutrition. I remember going to restaurants and, everything was based on butter. Everything was, the fattier the steak, the better. Talk about, thank you.
That's not great. That's not
Couldn't
good.
resist.
It's good, but it's bad. Charles, talk about how nutrition now is becoming one of the drivers at restaurants.
Which Charles, me?
Dr. Feldman, your wheelhouse.
Dr. Feldman.
I'm going to thank you, Joyce. We have a very diverse population, but I want to say there's a big difference between what goes on in the city and what goes on in the suburbs. And what's going on in the city is very transformative. What's going on in the suburbs, I'm not getting it. Still, I see a lot of traditional restaurants, a lot of chains. There's not a lot of innovation going on here. I'm surprised. I think the market is more conservative out here. As far as, and again, I go into restaurants out here and we're in Montclair. I go into restaurants, I'm seeing the same old stuff. I'm not, there is some plant-based, I think if you said vegan 5 years ago, nobody would know what you're talking about. Now they probably have one or two things on the menu. Other than that, I'm not seeing anything transformative out of the city. And I think we should consider the differences between the city populations and, we always say, where's America? I don't know. But out here in Montclair, and Montclair is a very upscale, transformative city. I'm still not seeing the changes that are going on in New York out here.
So Bob, back to you, Bob. So here we've talked about all the problems. You speak to somebody who's been doing the same thing that his dad did in 1963, and he's wondering why it's not working. How do you start? What's the first step?
Well, I would think just based on where you are geographically, where your location is, you'd have to look at the available market. Who's going to come to your restaurant? So there's probably a mileage in the suburbs anyway. There's a mileage radius of how far people will drive. Then you have to look at from there. You have to analyze. I would think who actually lives there, what the cultural, the breakdown is, the ethnic breakdown, what people actually like to eat, what their ages are, and so forth. So if I'm living in a community in Brooklyn, down in Red Hook, and it's full of 30 to 40-year-old young families that either order in or eat out constantly, I would start to look at, well, what do they eat and what kind of restaurant or experience can I create for them that is out of the ordinary? So if I took, for instance, and I love some of the restaurants here in Westchester, if I took a typical staid old style restaurant from Westchester that was fairly successful, just goes along and does a good business, and dropped them into that neighborhood in Brooklyn, nobody would go. So I think you have to look at who's near there and make something that's going to attract people. You have to attract people, right? If you don't attract people, and it doesn't matter how good your food is.
So you're saying there's no template?
No, I say the template is like if any company is going to put out a new product or create a new product, what they do is analyze the marketplace and figure out if there's a need, and if there is a need, what specific product would fill that need that would allow us to extract as much money from the marketplace for that product as we can possibly get. Restaurants don't think that. Restaurants are more like the E-Myth revisited. I'm really good at making spaghetti and meatballs. Therefore, I'm going to create a restaurant that serves nothing but spaghetti and meatballs, forgetting the fact that nobody in the immediate area even eats Italian food. Period. End of story.
Okay.
That's a
All right.
suburban problem a lot, Bob. And you're right. I live in Westchester too, and I kind of scratch my head sometimes at the restaurants that open around me and say, "What were you thinking?"
Yeah.
It just doesn't. And then they don't understand why 6 months to a year from now they're out of business. And I'm like, well, you haven't changed your menu since the day you opened. But the other problem, and Charles mentioned it too, when you talk about the suburb, is the fact that you don't have a 7-day-a-week potential for revenue the way you do in the city. You may mention Red Hook. There's a bunch of people that'll come out of work on a Monday night in Brooklyn, or maybe even worked at home, and they're going to meet their friends for a cocktail and a quick bite, and they'll do it in a gastropub. They'll do it in a neighborhood bar. They'll do it in a little restaurant. There's restaurants in Westchester that are not open on Monday nights because they're not getting anybody, and they're barely surviving Tuesday or Wednesday nights.
Right.
So Ed, let's get back to you on this. So we've gone through planning, we've gone through everything. What about monitoring? How do we stop the leaks in the system so that you get to, the truth of the matter is it's not make more money, it's keep what you made. And how do we move into a system where you and your company help with this?
Good question, Larry. The most important part about controlling costs is the actual food cost. And food cost changes every day. So how do you monitor it? How do you make sure you're getting a good deal? Because what will happen is you'll argue that the chicken breast is high and they'll come down that price, but they'll raise what you're paying for mayonnaise. So the thing you've got to do is you got to put them on a cost plus contract, and you allow them to cover their cost. You allow them to cover their freight and their overhead, but the cost plus is whatever they're paying plus a markup. And then you have to audit it. You have to make sure that you look at what they're paying, look at the markup that you agreed to, and make sure that that's the price you're getting. Because again, food cost is the most expensive part of running an operation.
Yes, yes. Let's take the lowly meatball, the lowly meatball. Some people, are proud that they put out veal meatballs. Veal meatballs, Can you find a chopped meat that's more expensive than veal? Is there a way to make a mixture of less expensive items that you're going to put in tomato sauce anyway, that will taste the same? That's just one example of things. So creativity comes into it, and I am sorry that we don't have a restaurateur here to talk about that, but we've left out that one part of the creativity of the plate, using the same item 5 times in your menu, the things that you can do to stretch a budget. So Bob, I just want to go back to you because it all goes, how do you convince the guy who's working the business like it was in 63 that he has to move and change?
Well, it's just a few questions. The first question is, are you happy with what's going on? And if the answer is no, not really, well, how long have you been unhappy? And then the question becomes, what have you done to try to fix this? And then the question is, how come that didn't work? And at the end of that sequence of questions, that if that person doesn't feel enough pain to do something, then they're doomed. They're just going to be the same.
Basically the same thing you say to your 7-year-old who's still having trouble doing the same thing the same way. If you come to the low branch, duck.
I wouldn't necessarily put it in those terms, just because I don't want to insult 7-year-olds.
Okay. Yeah, it's true. It's true. When you come to the low branch, duck. Well, if you think moving your head to the left and moving your head to the right, you're still not going to bang your head. I think that's a fallacy. So, Fred, you've been listening to this.
Yep.
Sum it up for us.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. First step is that mortgage better be payable, and whatever it is that, or that rent, that piece better be in place. And either it's a percentage of revenue or it's something that's real so that you actually have a chance. Then the second piece becomes you take the things that you can fix and you focus on what you can fix. So you go to somebody like, you work with somebody like Mr. Flanagan and you look at cost plus and things like that, where you can bring the vendor in and say, look, this is where I need to be, et cetera. So you can fix that. I think the toughest piece of it right now is the labor piece. I think you're damn lucky to have the people that you have, and you have to do what you need to do to retain them, et cetera. And sure, you can start to look at technology, but I don't know if you can afford, Charles has me frightened of spending capital now with debt. So you better be thinking twice about what the actual return's going to be. And then you got to think about what Joyce said about how you're going to put the actual food on the plate and whether you're going to appeal to what you think your customers' needs are or what the customers actually told you the needs are. And I think that's that's the overview of the puzzle.
So
an awful lot of common sense.
Look, think,
Yeah.
listen, change. I mean, it's these are four things that need to be done.
And I don't know if the word is change as much as it is fix.
Fix.
There's a big difference between change and fix. And I think what we're talking about here is fixing.
Well, wouldn't you
Okay.
say the fact that TGI Fridays has gone into bankruptcy?
Yeah.
That's been a staple restaurant franchises for a very long time. They had a good model. Their food was pretty good. People enjoyed going there.
Mm-hmm.
So what you just said, they have to fix it. So what is the fix? What is the fix?
So I would disagree with you. I don't think the model was any good for a long time.
Okay.
I think the model was based on how do I minimize food costs by serving the lowest quality menu that I possibly can to maximize my margin and sell as much beer and alcohol as I can to hide the fact that the food was so-so, and they ran out of string.
You once you hit the bottom in pricing, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And there's just so many things you can throw cheese on.
And people and customers are not stupid. I think we underestimate the I don't want to use the word sophistication, but I think we underestimate the palate.
Right.
And the Mendoza line of the palate today.
Right.
And that goes back
so
to what
then
Bob
They've
said.
been around for a long time, and I think that again, just as an observer, I think they didn't respond to the increased competition, the casual dining that sprung up all around them. They had an old name. They didn't rehab the name or rehab anything around it.
So there
It's
are a lot
TGI
of
Fridays.
others.
It's TGI Fridays. I'm sorry, Joyce, I cut you off. It's TGI Fridays. It's Red Lobster. It's Ruby Tuesdays when it still existed. To Fred's point, the food stunk in all those restaurants. Okay, I can't tell you the last time I was in any one of them and had a satisfying experience.
Right.
Well, and as Fred said, they tried to capitalize on the alcohol side, but the consumer has changed. Look at other chains, and maybe it's not a fair comparison, but look at Chili's. Chili's seems to morph every 10 minutes in a good way. Okay, it's a new value meal. It's a new bit of technology at the table to keep the kids happy. They tried robotics. It didn't work for them. They got rid of it. They built a concept during the pandemic, a ghost kitchen with wings. At a certain point, they realized that wasn't going to have the legs. In the first year, it did $175 million worth of wings during the pandemic, but they turned around and took the wings and put them onto the regular menu. Okay, and then killed off the ghost kitchen. So they morph, they change. And I think to Fred's point, TGI Fridays, when was the last time any of us went into a TGI Fridays and had a great experience?
So that whole
Yeah.
lane of restaurants, franchises, that whole lane is is really having problems, and we may see a lot more go under. But then we have Chipotle, Sweet Green. We have all these new, young, innovative franchisee opportunities, and those seem to be taking off and really filling that lane. So what you just said, Charles, about the food is always, was never up to a great standard. The food standard has elevated, so that's taking in, and the franchises that are in that lane will be the new restaurants that we'll be seeing in 5 to 10 years.
What you're also we're not
Yeah.
speaking about is the target audience.
Right.
The target audience.
Mhm.
Chipotle is not targeted to me. It's targeted to my children and their children. So
It looks like a college cafeteria when you walk into any one in the suburbs.
Except
It's
I beg to differ with you, because if you walk into Chipotle and you go in with your grandkids or your kids, that there's stuff on the menu, even though you may not be familiar or love the concept, there's stuff on the menu that's geared towards you. Okay, so you have somebody, for the sake of discussion, that doesn't want a burrito that looks like a Lincoln log. It's 10 pounds heavy, but there's a bowl available. There's alternatives available geared towards different markets, and they try to make it easy for you. And if you look at the guy who just left Chipotle to go where? Starbucks, to fix Starbucks. If you look at what he did during his time at Chipotle, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
The progress he made, the menu changes he made, and he started it at Starbucks the day he walked in. What's the first thing he did? He said, we're not going to, starting November 1st, we're not charging for alternative milks. It was brilliant. It was a single decision that affects, I don't know what the percentage of people that go to Starbucks, but it was a strategic thing. So when you did your capitalization a minute ago of what we're talking about, I think the one word that was missing, and Bob mentioned it early, it's strategic. Right. You just need to go, whether you're talking about a restaurant and looking at their expenses and call an ed, or it's a club and debt, you just need to think strategically. I looked at that review that I talked about a second ago, and there's a line in there, and it's really funny. It says, how does one measure a restaurant against its predecessor without having visited the original? And then they tracked down some of the people that used to go there. It said it felt like eating a little bistro in Paris. It didn't overstep itself. And it said, and the food, old-fashioned, good, but not fancy, but comforting. The new Le Beau d'Or is certainly not the same as the old one.
Okay. So the target is important of where you're going. Look at a restaurant.
There's a great example of this. Chipotle is a great example, and you're going to laugh at this other example. I guess they're still in business. I don't know, but Hooters had it figured out.
Yeah,
you may hate them, but man, they knew the market. They knew what the people in the market wanted. They sold them exactly what they wanted, and they made a shitload of money. I guess. I don't know if they're
still around. They're still around. But I think, to Joyce's point, they're going to be on that side of the equation with some of these others. They're going to be the next Red Lobster or the next TGI Fridays. That concept's dead.
Originally, though, they nailed it in the beginning.
Yep.
They just never.
Well, you've got those that are innovators who lead the lane, and then you've got those that come along and sort of follow and, stay with the trend. And then you've got, the ever-changing evolution of our restaurant industry.
Thank you. It's that time. It's that time when we have to go around the room and give our last thoughts. But before we do that, I want to thank our sponsors once again. ERA, if the leaders in capital conservancy, if you're looking to plug those leaks in your revenue streams, call Ed Flanagan at ERA, and his people will help you do exactly that. And Eastern Business Solutions, the finest in office equipment and solutions. If you have a problem, if your office equipment doesn't match your computers, if you have systems that need updating, called Eastern Business Solutions. So once again, let's go around the room. Charles Dorn, would you please start us off and give that last tidbit?
Very simply, think and act strategically.
Okay. Dr. Feldman.
I thank you. I think we have to consider where restaurants are. If in New York City, where maybe 30,000 people pass every day, is a little bit different from the suburbs, where people have to actually want to go to a place and drive. It's not so convenient. So different strategies, different strategic reach, and different markets.
Okay. Joyce.
There's so many options for businesses in our industry, and we're all looking forward and excited to see what's going to happen in 2025.
And Bob.
I agree with Charles. It's all about strategic planning, identifying the ideal target client, and a patron, whatever, and giving and filling holes in the marketplace that things don't exist.
Okay. And Ed.
Yes, and as far as controlling costs, it's not always what you expect, it's what you inspect.
Ooh. Ooh.
That would be a good poster.
Ooh.
I learned that one from Fred.
I like that.
Okay, Fred.
I think it's have fun. That's the only thing we missed on this. This is fun. It's about hospitality. And if you listen to your customers and you listen to your team, it's going to be fun, and you're going to figure out a way to make it successful.
Yep. And, I would like to thank everyone for coming. And it's just been, you guys surpassed my expectations, and thank you very much.
Thank
But I
you.
shouldn't be surprised, because you do every week. Come back in 2 weeks. We touched on this today when we talk about.
Hopefully we'll have a guest.
Yeah, if not, we'll all sit here and chat again. This was fun. Joyce, you bring the bagels next week, in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
All right, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Just
So-
2 things. Everybody, stay positive, test negative, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Amen.
Bye
Amen.
now.
Thanks, guys.